Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. The start of 2020 has seen a flurry of diplomatic activity on Libya, with two high-profile international events taking place within a week. The latest summit in Berlin brought together the country's warring sides, but most of the pressure was directed at foreign powers fueling Libya's five-year-plus conflict. With modest expectations, the Berlin conference ended with little surprise: an agreement to enforce a UN arms embargo and renewed calls for a durable ceasefire. But it didn't take long for Warlord Khalifa Haftar to thumb his nose at the international community. Just days after the talks in Berlin, illegal militias under Haftar's control launched a series of attacks, including on Tripoli's airport. Fighters loyal to the warlord also reportedly blocked Libyan oil installations as the Berlin summit got underway. Despite calls for a viable ceasefire from the United Nations and other world leaders, Haftar continues his assault on Libya's UN-backed government. Will his foreign backers abide by the embargo and stop pouring in weapons and cash? And is Haftar becoming a liability? And to answer that, joining me now is Emadeddin Badi, who is a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute, and Bilgehan Ozturk, who is a political analyst at SETA Research Center. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. So 12 foreign leaders, the United Nations, the European Union, the African Union, and the Arab League, they all agreed to support ceasefire and uphold nearly a decade-old UN armed embargoes in a bid to end the hostilities in Libya. And as the conference ended, what is now being called as the constructive ambiguity, Warlord Khalifa Haftar, he did not waste any time and violated the agreed truce once again. Emadeddin, tell us, what is the driving force behind Haftar's aggression, and what is he trying to gain by shutting down oil facilities and attacking one of capital's airport?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there with regards to Haftar's behavior. I would say that this is symptomatic of Haftar's long-term disdain for a peaceful solution. It isn't new that he doesn't really buy into the idea of a peaceful resolution of the Libyan conflict, and it isn't a new, let's say, dynamic whereby he would be spoiling or not committing to something he had shown some commitment towards, like a peaceful resolution of the conflict, or even in this case, the ceasefire. On the oil blockade was engineered by Haftar. It looks as if it has popular support, which it does to a certain extent, because at the end of the day, it is a civil war. It's engineered as a move that protests Turkish intervention in Libya, given the fact that Syrian mercenaries are allegedly being paid by Libyan funds. However, the person who is enabling and who could basically halt this oil blockade would be Haftar himself.
But isn't it a self-defeating gambit, as all actors in Libya rely on this oil revenue?
Absolutely. I mean, the oil revenue is vital not just for the conflict, which some people forget. The entire Libyan economic system relies on it. That we had an episode like this where a blockade was engineered before under the same label of grievances, and that had destructive impact on the economy, on hospitals, on facilities, on people on currency even, and stuff that people use every day.
Yeah. So, Bilgehan, how long do you think it will take before Haftar's benefactors realize that he's become more trouble than what is worth? And Turkey has been saying that he's not a trustworthy guy, he doesn't favor peace. So do you think some of his supporters someday could come around and realize that?
I'm not very optimistic. I don't think its benefactors or patrons will realize that. It's not that they don't understand the Haftar's the source of problem rather than the solution. They know and they're aware of Haftar's source of resolution, the problem, but they still support Haftar because they expect some benefits and interest from Haftar's victory. And the reason why Haftar is so defiant in the face of some resolutions and Berlin conference outcomes is the reason that he is overconfident that its benefactors, supporters will not punish him. and is the reason why he is violating the ceasefire, and is also the reason why he is attacking the oil field as well, because he is overconfident, and no one is either willing or competent in punishing Haftar in that respect. And I think he is also aware that he's also aware of the motivations of many European countries by joining in Berlin Conference.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you believe Western powers, now having realized that their security and their lucrative contracts are now at risk, do you believe that they'll be able to put some sort of a pressure on Haftar supporters, especially the United Arab Emirates and Egypt?
Well, there's limits for that. I mean, we were talking about mainly Italy and France, but even them, they have quite divergent, approaches in Libya. Their differences lie in many aspects. For example, Italy is sided with more GNA, but rather France is more sided with Haftar. This is a position that the French position is much more salient after Macron's presidency. When it was François Hollande, it was slightly more ambiguous. But with Macron, it is much more obviously sided with Haftar.
Yeah, I mean,
but there are reasons for that.
Yeah, we also know that the current actually tensions date back to 2011 when France, along with the United Kingdom, intervened militarily into Libya. Now that the Macron says we reject all interventions, foreign interventions. But Emadeddin, tell me, there weren't that big expectations from the Berlin conference. Do you believe that this conference provided some sort of a legitimacy to Haftar at the international stage, or exposed him as a spoiler?
But definitely didn't do the latter, probably did the former. By inviting him, I think Europeans somewhat shot themselves in the foot. And what the optics that it sends is that they almost rewarded him for not accepting to sign a ceasefire that was brokered by Turkey and Russia and Moscow. So that's the optics that it sends. On whether Berlin provides hope, I would say a lot of people hope that Berlin would be a change in the trajectory of the Libyan conflict, and it will be. It will be a change, but it's not clear whether this will be de-escalation or escalation. What Berlin set, with the precedent that Berlin sets, is either everyone's committed to de-escalate, or that the Libyan field or the Libyan playing field, it doesn't matter who escalates. And that right now, the lack of follow-up to Berlin, the lack of an endorsement of a resolution at the United Nations Security Council, the fact that a lot of states have been working to not condemn the oil blockade, that sends signals. It sends signals that you can still operate in Libya with impunity. And we've seen also alleged continued transfer of equipment to Haftar, continued transfer of equipment on Turkey's behalf to Libya. So clearly signs of escalation haven't really receded. Everyone is not committed to what they said they're committed to in Berlin. And ultimately what that does is that it catalyzes the internationalization of Libya's conflict. So if conflict now erupts again, it will be a lot more violent than how it was before.
All right. Bilgehan, how has the recent push by Turkey with its agreements with Libya on maritime and security issues, as well as its cooperation with Russia, has impacted the EU stance on Libya?
I think it has been a real game changer. I'm adamant that had it not been for the Turkish, maritime, memorandum of understanding, and also the deployment of Turkish troops in Tripoli, there would not be even a Berlin conference. That is for what I'm sure. The deployment of Turkish troops and also the signing of memoranda of understanding, I think triggered the European Union countries to not leave the initiative to Turkey's hands only. Yes. That triggered their motivation to gather this conference.
But on the other hand, Greece says it will never accept a political solution for the European Union that doesn't scrap Turkey-Libya deal. What is your take on that then?
Well, it is only natural. I mean, Greece is quite unhappy, and after the memorandum of understanding, we saw Greece starting to flirt with Haftar, even if Greece was not an actor in Libya from the very beginning. It is just trying to react to Turkey's move, and also that is also the reason why they expelled the ambassador of Libya from Greece. So these are just natural reactions from Greece, but I don't think it will dominate and dictate the way European Union countries will behave in this issue.
And we're not sure about that, how the European Union will be acting in the days to come. So one of the main goals of the Berlin Conference, as we all know, that to stop foreign powers from sending weapons to Libya. Russia, which has hosted the Prime Minister Sarraj multiple times, is also backing Khalifa Haftar. So gentlemen, if you will, let's take a look at Russia's role in Libya and how it is working with Turkey, despite being on the opposite side of that conflict.
Главное теперь, чтобы после Берлинской конференции все пойдет.
1 second.
And to get a better understanding of Russia's role in Libya, joining me now from Moscow is Irina Zviagelskaya, who is a professor and the head of the Center for the Middle East Studies and the Institute of World Economic and International Relations. Irina, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. So how does Russia position itself in this Libya conflict, since it loaded a little progress was made at the Berlin conference?
So, first of all, I believe that for Russia, it's only natural to have relations with both sides of the conflict. It has already been mentioned here that Sarraj visited Russia for many times. And on the other hand, we do have certain relations with Haftar, and he also wants to depict Russia as his supporter. It's not always reflects the real thing, but at the same time, I believe it's good to have relations with both sides, since, as it has already been mentioned, it's a civil war. And we should take into consideration the fact that Haftar controls some 70%, some say 80% of the territory right now. And as far as Tripoli government is concerned, it's internationally recognized. So it's also recognized by Russia.
So do you think Russian President Vladimir Putin took a note of Haftar's walkout from Moscow talks?
Well, I believe probably does, but it again shows that no one can really control the parties involved into a civil war, because they have interests of their own. They are looking for allies, either regional or global allies. Yes, it was the idea of Mr. Putin and of Mr. Erdogan to make the sides sign a ceasefire agreement.
All right.
It didn't happen, unfortunately.
All right.
It didn't happen, unfortunately. So what?
I'm going to get back to you, Irina, shortly. But Bilgehan, do you think there will be another comeback for Russia, as was the case in Syria? And what's the grand strategy behind Russia's position in Libya?
Well, I mean, there are many aspects of that strategy, and when it comes to military and strategic, issues, Russia is quite, acting aggressively, in a maximalist way. And when it sees an opportunity, when it sees a window of opportunity or a vacuum somewhere, it fills that vacuum. That is what we saw in Middle East and North Africa, and Libya is not an exception. And Russia views an opportunity there because the United States is not very upfront, it's not very prominent, it is an implicit actor. And Russia is seeing the opportunity to join the coalition which is supporting Haftar. And by doing that, Russia is expecting some benefits and certain interests. And very important Russia's input into this coalition, militarily speaking, because had it not been Wagner's contribution, I don't see Haftar forces will be that successful in advancing very close to Tripoli.
But we also know that Wagner withdrew from the front lines. I want to get back to Irina, to Moscow. I mean, what kind of an instrumental role do you think the Wagner group played for Russia in that conflict? Because I just mentioned it withdrew from the front lines. What does that tell us?
Well, first of all, I would like to stress that there were a lot of speculations whether Wagner force are in Syria or in Libya, I'm sorry, or not. And first of all, I would like to underline the fact that this is, if they are there, they are mercenaries. They are private army. So as far as I understand, there are different groups of interest in Russia. And Wagner is not manipulated by the state at all. So it should be taken into consideration when we talk about.
Okay, let's take it into consideration. Emadeddin, what do you make of Russia's position in Libya, as well as this Wagner group's activities?
I think Russia is playing a very precarious game, but it is playing it quite skillfully. It saw an opportunity to insert itself in the Libya conflict. Now, obviously, the argument that is made is that these are private military contractors, that they're independent from the state, etc., etc. But clearly, this is somewhat disproven by the fact that later on, Putin tried to leverage this independent group or the support that he's lended Haftar to actually broker the ceasefire. That move backfired, and I think that highlights, as Irina mentioned, that Haftar cannot be controlled. That is part of the reason.
Is it because of his personality, or is it because
I believe, I mean, he can only be as stubborn as as much as international backers afford him to be stubborn. So by walking out on the ceasefire, Haftar is at the end of the day a rational military actor. He wouldn't walk out on something if he knew he would receive no support. And I believe that he is very well aware that his ideological alignment and the return on investment that other backers expect that they'll have in him, like the UAE, like the Saudis, like Egypt, that guarantees
But
him
on the
support.
other hand, United States was very swift on calling on the national oil production firm to restart oil production. So do you think the United States will somehow pressure on the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia and Egypt, because apparently it cares a lot about the oil?
At this stage, the U.S., it's only the U.S. State Department, if I'm not mistaken, that issued a statement. The last time a similar move was, let's say, engineered, there was a personal letter from Donald Trump that actually made Haftar back off and stop the oil blockade. Unless this is replicated, or unless something at the similar level is replicated, I don't see this oil blockade stopping, unfortunately. And I don't see the European Union will muster the political will to exert the same, let's say, pressure on Haftar. So really the onus on it is on the United States to actually exert that form of pressure.
All right, let's go back to Moscow. Irina, we all know that President Erdogan and President Putin, despite being on the opposite sides in multiple conflicts, have managed to keep their relationship intact and without compromising their policies. That's how, at least, we see. How can you explain this delicate balance between them?
Well, I believe you have already explained it using the word delicate. It's really a delicate partnership. But this partnership has already a history of its own, because we all know the format, the Astana format in Syria, where it proved very successful. And as far as Libya is concerned, well, probably it's a new field to try this partnership again. And I believe, despite the differences which you mentioned, and even probably due to these differences, we can find certain common ground better than the countries which agree on everything, because the contradictions show us that there are very important issues to be solved.
All right. So if we get back to the realities on the ground, Bilgehan, tell me what's at stake for Libya unless these hostilities ended and arms embargo reinforced? I mean, because the President Erdogan warned Tripoli's fall could leave a fertile ground for armed forces like Daesh and Al-Qaeda and etc. What do you make of that?
Very true. I mean, if Tripoli is entangled in a prolonged, let's say, urban warfare, there will be a lot of human life losses, and it will be a fertile ground because of the very widespread unhappiness with Haftar's move, taking down Tripoli, taking down a government of national accord, and it would trigger a lot of armed groups to go underground. This might feed in some elements of extremism. And what's at stake here is a very prolonged, civil war, much more instability, cross-border, interactions in a negative way. So, what's coming is not a very bright picture if this, hostilities are continuing because of the balance of power as well. Because Haftar's forces are, attacking the Tripoli with their supports, uninterrupted.
Very shortly, Emadeddin, while the fate of Libya continues to be negotiated in European and Arab capitals, representatives of Libyan civil society were nowhere to be seen. We know that there have been some recent protests, but what's the mood like in Libya among ordinary people when their countries is being discussed at international level?
Well, this is where I guess maybe actors don't realize, and I'll link this maybe to the Turkey and Russia rapprochement of sort. Now, a lot of people think that a lot of people wouldn't mind a Turkey-Russia rapprochement if it brokers some form of peace at this stage. They have a lot of disbelief in Western, let's say, idealistic liberal forums for negotiations, since you had Paris, you had Palermo, you had Abu Dhabi, you had these power sharing arrangements that ignored local realities, the latest of which now seems to be Berlin.
Yes.
And that has amounted to nothing, has not been able to exert pressure on neither local nor international actors. The morale is, well, if no one is going to take the steering wheel collectively, let's get two actors to bilaterally agree on things and broker our own peace, broker the peace for us.
All right. Last question, Irina, is to you. We know that there's going to be some follow-up meetings between the sides concerned. So what's Russia's next move, to your opinion?
Well, I believe that for Russia, it's very important to be a part of the European efforts as well, international efforts as well. I don't know exactly what the next move will be, but I agree with those who said that the situation on the ground is the most important thing. Of course, outside powers can try and bring the conflicting parties to the table, but as we see, sometimes these conflicting parties are not ready to sign any agreements. So the responsibility, I believe, still lies with the Libyan side, strange as it may sound. But international community, including Russia and including Turkey, of course, can only help them to recognize that the time is running out.
Yeah, we see that. Okay, Irina, thank you very much for joining us from Moscow. Gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time. And thank you very much for joining me on set here on Straight Talk. Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ayşe Süberker. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.